psychology of people who don't chase anyone is often misunderstood. Most people assume they are cold, arrogant, or emotionally unavailable. But psychology tells a very different story. These people learned early that chasing attention rarely creates connection. It only creates imbalance. They noticed that the more they tried to convince, explain, or prove their worth, the less respected they felt. So they stopped. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started valuing their energy. People who don't chase understand something most people miss. Attention given freely is rarely valued. When someone has to be persuaded to stay, the relationship is already unstable. Instead of running after people, they focus on alignment. They pay attention to effort, consistency, and mutual interest. Silence doesn't scare them. It informs them. They read behavior instead of words, patterns instead of promises. Psychology shows that these individuals usually developed strong self-worth through disappointment. They learned that chasing creates anxiety, self-doubt, and resentment. So they replaced chasing with choosing. They let people show who they are without interference. If someone pulls away, they don't panic. They don't overthink. They simply adjust their position. They also understand power dynamics. Chasing hands control to the other person. It shifts the balance. People who don't chase protect their emotional autonomy. They would rather be alone than feel unwanted. This isn't pride. It's self-respect. They don't fear loss because they know losing someone who doesn't choose them is not a real loss. In the end, they attract differently. Calm energy invites curiosity. Boundaries create value. And the people who stay are there because they want to be, not because they were chased into it. Brain 2, the psychology of people who don't need validation. The psychology of people who don't need validation is rooted in internal security. These individuals stopped outsourcing their self-worth to other people's reactions. Likes, praise, approval, and recognition no longer decide how they feel about themselves. Psychology shows that once someone builds internal validation, external feedback loses its power to control them. Most people are addicted to validation without realizing it. They seek confirmation before trusting their own judgment. They adjust themselves to be liked. They explain themselves to be understood. But people who don't need validation learned that approval is temporary and unstable. It changes based on mood, trends, and convenience. So they stopped chasing it. These people still appreciate respect and recognition, but they don't depend on it. They don't argue to convince others of their value. They don't overshare to be accepted. They don't perform for attention. Their confidence is quiet because it doesn't need witnesses. Psychology suggests this mindset usually forms after disappointment. At some point, they realized that even when they gave their best, approval was not guaranteed. So they redirected inward. They decided that their opinion of themselves would matter more than anyone else's opinion of them. This creates emotional stability. Criticism doesn't shatter them. Praise doesn't inflate them. They remain centered. is often mistaken for arrogance, when in reality, it's independence. People who don't need validation move freely. They choose based on values, not applause. And that freedom is something most people never experience. Brain 3, the psychology of people who don't react emotionally. The psychology of people who don't react emotionally is often misunderstood as indifference. But psychology shows the opposite. These people feel deeply. They just learned control. They understand that immediate emotional reactions often create regret, not resolution. So they pause. Most people react automatically. Anger, defensiveness, panic, or the need to explain all rise instantly. But people who don't react emotionally have trained awareness. They separate emotion from action. They let the feeling exist without letting it decide their behavior. Psychology explains this as emotional regulation. Instead of letting emotions hijack decisions, these individuals observe first. They ask themselves what the situation actually requires. Silence becomes a tool. Calm becomes a shield. They don't need to win every moment. They care more about long-term control than short-term relief. This makes them hard to manipulate. Emotional reactions are predictable. Calm responses are not. When someone cannot provoke you, they lose leverage. People who don't react emotionally protect their mental space. They choose when to speak, when to walk away, and when to stay silent. This doesn't mean they suppress emotions. It means they process them privately instead of performing them publicly. They don't give their emotional energy to every situation. They reserve it for what truly matters. In a world driven by impulse, emotional restraint is power. And power always looks quiet. Brain 4, the psychology of people who don't stay where they're not respected. The psychology of people who don't stay where they're not respected is built on boundaries. These individuals understand that respect is not something you negotiate for. It's something that exists or doesn't. Once they recognize consistent disrespect, they don't argue about it. They leave. Most people stay too long. They hope behavior will change. They wait for apologies. They search for closure. But people who don't tolerate disrespect understand patterns. One moment can be a mistake. Repetition is information. Psychology shows that these individuals learned to trust their perception. They don't need validation to confirm mistreatment. They don't need permission to walk away. They value peace more than explanation. They also understand that staying teaches others how to treat them. Every time disrespect is tolerated, it becomes normalized. So they remove themselves quietly. No drama, no revenge, just distance. This doesn't mean they are heartless. It means they are self-protective. They know that self-respect requires action, not words. And walking away is sometimes the most powerful statement. People who don't stay where they're not respected choose self-loyalty over attachment. And that choice changes everything. Brain 5, the psychology of people who don't fear being alone. The psychology of people who don't fear being alone is deeply misunderstood. Society often labels solitude as loneliness, but psychology shows that comfort with solitude is a sign of emotional maturity. These people learned that being alone is not emptiness, it's clarity. They don't rush into connections to avoid silence. They don't stay in relationships to escape themselves. They understand that desperation leads to poor choices, so they wait. People who don't fear being alone have a strong internal relationship. They can sit with their thoughts. They can reflect without distraction. They don't need constant noise to feel alive. Psychology suggests this trait often develops after disappointment. After realizing that company does not guarantee connection, they learned to enjoy their own presence. From that place, relationships become a choice, not a need. This makes them selective. They don't settle. They don't chase. They don't tolerate imbalance. They choose people who add to their life, not fill a void. Being alone is not their fear. Losing themselves is. And because of that, they move through life with quiet confidence.